Good evening. Thank you for being here tonight. I'm Dick Donahue. I am chair of Common Threads Northwest. We're tonight having a forum calling Issued Forum 2020, and we'll be addressing three areas we think are of great importance to you. One is the condition of our schools based on what's happening with COVID. The second is what's happening with law enforcement and public safety. And third is what's going to happen with our local governments when it comes to finance and how are they going to handle the effects of COVID-19. What I need you to do tonight, though, Common Threads, the Fourth Corner, and tonight the Washington Policy Center are hosting this forum, and we've been doing forums for about 4 years now. And of course, we're a nonprofit, so we don't have anybody feeding us. And we've done that with public forums, most of them out at Meridian High School, where we've been able to pass the can. But because of COVID, we don't have a live audience, therefore we can't pass the can. So tonight we're going to ask you if you can go to Common Threads Northwest and make a donation. All you have to do is go to commonthreadsnorthwest.org, hit the donate button, and you can make a donation. If you got any questions, you can call me at 733-1200. But again, that's Common Threads Northwest. We hope that you enjoy the forum. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our first panel tonight, chaired by Charlie Crabtree. So Charlie, go for it.
Thanks, Dick. My name's Charlie Crabtree, and I am publisher of the Fourth Corner News here in the Fourth Corner of Washington State. Tonight, I get to moderate the education portion of our Issues Forum. And right now, we're going to introduce our three wonderful panel members who have agreed to take on education and COVID. So first I have Lieve Finney, who is the director of the Center of Education at the Washington Policy Center. She's the author of An Option for Learning, an assessment of student achievement in charter public schools, which in 2011 reignited the charter school debate here in Washington State. Lieve holds a law degree from Boston University and a Bachelor of Arts degree from Wellesley College. She has retired from her law practice to raise two children and work in a small business with her husband. Lieve is committed to improving public schools by expanding school options for all parents and regardless of their zip code, including charter schools, vouchers, private schools, online, and other innovations in education. Second, we have Laura Mckinney, and she's on the front lines of being a volunteer citizen involved in local governance in one of our school districts right here in Whatcom County, the Blaine School District. She was elected to the school board in 2017, and definitely when it comes to all the new information on COVID, she's on the front line. She's getting it first and making decisions based on that information. She began work in education and workforce development on her assignments in the U.S. Foreign Service, in the embassy in the country of Georgia, not the state, the country of Georgia. Having 5 children, she has had the experience with a variety of educational institutions across the U.S. and in several foreign countries. She volunteers for other community organizations concerning education. Finally, we got Paul Boonstra. Boonsma. Say it right, Charlie. He's the manager, what I would call the manager of the Linden Christian School Complex in Linden. Since 1995, he has served in Christian schools in North Carolina and Minnesota as a teacher and a principal. He received his BA from Trinity Christian College in Illinois, and he received his master's degree in school administration from East Carolina in Greenville, North Carolina. He has completed his doctorate in Minneapolis, Minnesota. He has 5 children, with the oldest daughter living in Nashville, Tennessee, and they have 4 children in the Linden Christian School District. And his wife is also involved. She teaches first grade there in the Linden School District. So tonight, we kind of would like to talk about 3 stages of what's going on in education from the aspect of COVID. So we're going to start out with when things started to shut down in March of this year and run until just before the school starts, and what happened with children during that time in the long term concerning education. Good, bad, or indifferent. We're going to start with that, and secondly, we'll do some information on getting people, get people ready to go to school with the school systems opening, what decision processes worked that worked to make that happen. And thirdly, we're going to talk a little bit about the future after COVID and what happened there. So to start out, we'll just start from my left to right. And Leave, you can start her off on what happened to kids because of the March to June missing school.
Well, children lost a third of their school year, and researchers have shown that, as you know, in April, a research group estimated that students would return to school in the fall of 2020 with, quote, roughly 70% of the learning gains in reading relative to a typical school year, and only 50% of learning gains in math. And so the children, having lost a third of their school year before, entered this school year significantly behind in reading and math.
Okay. Laura?
Well, in the Blaine School District, when the schools were closed, I think immediately the first concern was how to continue education, how to continue contact with the kids. We in Blaine, there's quite a disparity between internet connectivity. So that was a first concern. There was a lot of scrambling around trying to figure out, do we do worksheets for some kids? How do we get teachers even to be online? A lot of the teachers didn't have internet access from home. So there was just a lot of, I'd say, innovation. We were very creative. We had a new superintendent this year. It was his first year. It was quite an introduction for him. He's done a fantastic job, but it was really all hands on deck trying to figure out what we were going to do with that.
Okay. And Paul?
Yeah, I think Lee said a lot of the concerns correctly. We're really concerned about student learning and the loss that can happen and did happen for some. I think the concern with technology is real and something that we really had to contend with. The students who are more capable could continue to learn somewhat, especially for older students. Those that have IEPs or struggle is really where our concern continues, but was really focused there. So
you talked about that there is a pretty large loss of time in learning. Is there any planning or any thoughts or anything going on to see how we might make up some of this time that they've lost, and what kind of methods we might use to do that, Lee?
Well, that's what I'm really worried about, because this not only has the system had difficulty in just getting going again, and it's still not really in place. How is a remote instruction able to monitor where the children are and what they lost individually? So I'm very concerned about that, probably more concerned about that than anything, because our traditional public school system is very standardized, and it's kind of like a train that goes down the track, and you're either on the train or you're off the train. And this year, if schools don't open up to in-person learning, I see all kinds of children falling off the train. And let's say I had a fifth grader who's getting kind of inadequate remote instruction. And that fifth grader is not a great student, sort of so-so student. I was worried about him to start with. And he has kind of an inadequate program all year long coming forward this year. What happens next year? Well, the school district will put him in sixth grade. So he will already be behind this year, from last spring. He's going to lose out on a lot of what he should have been getting in fifth grade. And they're going to expect him to start sixth grade. And that is what I'm most worried about. It is.
Has there been any talk in Blaine or any other districts that you know about of year-round school when we get back to normal, or has there been any talk about getting back to normal?
I have to say I've heard that brought up, year-round school, in some discussions, but at this point, I would really say we're still working on the logistics. I think we are so day to day trying to deal with just the logistics of how to get this done, that the impacts, I think, are probably mounting exponentially. I think, Lee's right. We've already started behind, and as this continues, the longer it goes, the compounding interest of the impacts, we'll feel these for years and years to come. For those kids who can manage and who were already very self-motivated and self-actuated in their education, they will likely be fine. They'll likely be able to continue to do that, and they'll still have impacts as well. But for those who are not, they're just sitting still, if not going backwards.
Okay, thank you. Paul, I didn't ask, first of all, did you stay open from March until June, or did you close as well?
No, we followed the governor's
Okay.
order, and we were closed to the remainder of the 2019-2020 school year.
All right.
And then we opened September 1
Okay.
to in-person
Is there
education.
any plan or how we get kids caught up in Living
Yeah,
Christian?
I think I agree with Lee and Laura where there's a disparity, there's a concern there. I think we're all going to be recalibrating curriculum to be able to accommodate the needs of the learning for those students. And teachers have a extraordinary demand on them to differentiate the instruction for that disparity. So the lowest most struggling student to the highest, I think that gap grew. And
Okay.
so that's an incredibly challenging spot to be in as a classroom teacher, to be able to bridge that gap. It's especially problematic the younger you go,
Okay.
because numeracy and literacy is most essential and most gained in the younger ages. So kindergarten, first grade, second grade.
So let's feed off of that a little bit. I've heard, and I'm not certain of all the facts in this particular case, that a lot of school districts are coming back, even in Whatcom County, on the lower grades. So can you speak to that on a statewide basis?
Well, this is, of course, different from district to district, but on the whole, most districts are closed to in-person instruction. 95%, at the beginning of the school year, 95% of the students in Washington State were getting only remote instruction. Now, with some weeks passing, a few districts are opening up to the early grades, kindergarten or first grade. Tacoma was supposed to open up, and that's partly because of the health issue, but I think the education issue is should be driving this. Because for other reasons, I'll explain why later. So they are opening to some districts are opening to their earlier grades, but the struggle is very real. For example, in Tacoma, the Department of Labor and Industries just moved in to demand extra training for teachers on putting N95 masks on. So, and then the union said, we're not going back. There are too many teachers. There are too many kids here. This is too abrupt. So instead of opening up to K through first grade, kindergarten, first grade, and second grade, they're only opening up to kindergartners next week.
And that was Tacoma School?
That was Tacoma, which is like the third largest district in Washington State. So
Okay.
that is what we're seeing happen, sadly, going backward in Tacoma. Seattle is not going to open up any grades to any children so far.
And in Blaine, how about that? How have they started out this year, and what is their plan?
Well, we started off remotely. We did have a vote, and we tried to work through it. We talked about it quite a bit. I was really of the mindset that where there's a will, there's a way, and we could get there. But we did open remotely with a stated intent to get kids back phased in as quickly as possible. We have started that process. So we started with those kids we felt like were just the most needing of the in-person instruction. So we have our life skills and our kids with special needs are back in school, and starting, I think we're starting next week. We're going to bring in kindergartners.
Okay.
So that'll be the first kind of large group of kids that will come in, and that will be slower. But once those kids are in, and I think much of this is really just the unknown. And I think
So-
once we get the kids in, then we're going to start progressing faster. I believe we'll do first, second, and third grade next.
Okay.
And again, to your point, our focus definitely is on getting the younger kids in the building in front of their teachers as soon as possible.
So you spoke a little bit about taking a vote on whether you were going to fully open your schools or not, and what was the basic no on that particular issue with your board?
Well, I have to say our health department for Whatcom County came out just before I think all of us had said we were going to do a hybrid program,
Right.
in line with the state superintendent, the governor's outlines of what our restrictions were going to be, the 6-foot distance between the kids, the hand washing, the face masks. We had all of those things in place and had figured out a plan. And then the county health department came back and said they did not recommend that we go back. There was a lot of confusion as to what that meant as far as insurance. And in my mind, a recommendation was not a mandate. And I would go into the courtroom and say there was no willful negligence involved, that we just need to get the kids back. I was willing to make that stand. And I think in the end, it just, to me, that's what the school board's for. We're there to make those tough decisions. And in the same situation, when you're looking at public health, doctors, their first mandate is do no harm. So they want to save everybody. But public health, somebody has to make a decision based on all the information and what is the greater good for the community. And that was really the same, I felt like, for the school district, that on balance, we needed to get the kids back in, and we had a plan to do that with all the protocols in place. So we're getting there. It's going to be more phased in, but I think once the teachers and the kids, and we get that routine and they see how that works,
Right.
I think we'll be able to move faster. I think the parents want it.
And what happened in your private school, Paul?
Yeah. So we were on the exact same journey as what Laura described, where have been making plans following the guidance from OSPI, Department of Health, LNI, following all the same protocols and health guidelines, putting all that in place over the summer. Received the recommendation. The board and administration approved actually coming in person in the spirit of do no harm. We cannot eliminate the risk of COVID, but we felt like we had mitigated the risk and as best we could, and it was far better to have our entire student body on campus than it would be to have them in a remote setting. So essentially on September 1, we started K through 12 and have been in school since. So we're day 22, I believe it is today, and zero cases.
So as far as instruction, you're pretty normal, and the only place that's a little different is all of the COVID prevention.
Well, yes, but the COVID prevention drives a different type of instruction. 6 feet apart, no groups. So we've really gone back to almost a traditional classroom that isn't best for kids, but it's better than being in a distance learning environment.
Right. Okay. Great. So to that end, there are reports and polls, national polls, that just over half of Americans report that schools are open for in-person teaching where they live. And most parents in these communities are sending their kids back to school despite the lingering coronavirus threat. So, a couple of things. What are your thoughts, and how do we compare with the rest of the nation as far as health and the Department of Education, OSPI, here in Washington State?
I'll go ahead. That is a very interesting question. The UW Center for Reinventing Public Education, that has been following in great depth what is happening across the nation in districts across the country, came out with a report on September 10th saying that the criteria that Washington State is using to reopen its schools is far more stringent than the Harvard Global Health Initiative, than the World Health Organization, 5 times more stringent than that of the state of Connecticut, twice as stringent than Iowa. And so therefore, I have to conclude that our we've made it, it's the health, what they call the decision tree that the governor and the State Department of Health issued on August 5th is overly stringent. And it explains why today, for example, New York City schools opened their entire system, which is as large as the state of Washington. New York City educates 1 million students, and they open to in-person instruction to all grades today. The state of Florida opened a month ago to all grades and has not had a spike in COVID. And the countries of Europe and Asia have been open now for months, and they have not. Now, there are exceptions, of course, and they're handling it in situ, like Israel opened up and had to close down again. They had a spike. But many countries are showing the way using, managing risk. Close down this one school if a spike of COVID erupts. Don't close down the whole system. And that's the way I see Washington State behaving. It's all or nothing, little choice. That's
kind of the impression you get from the school district level is you're not getting maybe what you thought you might get from state level help.
Charlie, we the terminology that we use, I think we stopped defining it, and so everyone is saying things, and we think we're saying the same things that we're all understanding, but we're not. So when you say cases spiked, do you mean illnesses? Do you mean hospitalizations? Do you mean deaths? Or do you mean more people are getting tested and they're testing positive, regardless of symptoms or regardless of the impact? When we shut down in March, I think we all in our community in Whatcom County said we have one hospital. We understand that could be overflowed. We don't want to overwhelm the system. We will do what we can do for these weeks to see what happens. As far as I know, we have not been more than 3 people in the hospital for COVID in months. Oh. So, when you talk about cases, we don't even know, in fact, how in these tests, are you just showing that someone has had the virus, has been exposed, they have some remnant of it? We don't know what that means. And so we're making these decisions that we will live with for years and years when we think about these kids and them being out of school, that we're making these on definitions that we haven't even agreed upon.
Right. Paul.
What would you like me to respond to?
Well, first of all, you're open for school completely, and you have plans for what happens if something is there's an outbreak?
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yep.
And
So we've been in deep conversations with the Whatcom County Department of Health Department. We talk with them weekly, and a lot of back and forth and planning there. We definitely have plans in place in case. To close down one classroom or a grade level, or worst case scenario, a building. Our elementary, middle school, and high school are 3 separate buildings on one campus. Yes, we have plans for that. So
I guess it begs the question is, what's the difference? And you're in school and you're cooperating and doing everything that the health department says, and yet we don't have the public schools open. So
I think, Charlie, the difference is insurance. And unions and cooperation within the community.
I think the second category is a big one for us, is the unions.
Yeah.
And what we see in our community is the state level teacher union has one opinion, and we have a lot of teachers in our community who don't necessarily share that opinion. We are a small community. We all know each other. So it's I think difficult for them. It's a balancing act in trying to sort of follow what the direction is being given at the state level, while on the local level, we have so many teachers who know the impact of their children and they want to be in the classroom. They know how this is going and they want to get back, but they're not quite sure how they navigate that.
Okay. So at this point, I think we'll switch over to looking forward a little bit, and maybe getting some ideas for hope and change in our education system and what's going on. So, what do y'all think might happen in legislation coming up in the January session? Even if they have it remotely, I suspect they'll have it. This coming session, what kind of legislation would help a situation that we're in now, and be able to improve the education of our children as well? Lee.
Well, what is not being heard in many places is the voice of the parents. Parents are very upset at the hand that they've been dealt. There are often both parents are working, and they're being expected by their districts to manage multiple children on these computers, on multiple platforms. And so parents are pulling their hair out. They're filing lawsuits. They're signing petitions. They want change. And so I'm hoping that we will refocus on the parents and the family in Washington State Legislature by giving a portion of the fund. Recognize the schools are getting full funding, and they're not providing full service. So we could shift some of the funding, like a modest amount, $3,000 per child, to give to parents in a protected account that this treasurer oversees and make sure it's only used on education purposes. But just think of how that would solve the problem that we have. Children that are at varying levels of loss in learning. Parents could hire tutors and determine what they lost last spring and what they will lose going forward, and catch their children up. And I think that would be a great service, but not only to the families, it would change the dynamic. No longer would it be unions holding schools closed. The school districts would be forced to respond to the needs of parents, because parents would control a portion of the money. That is what I see as the hope for the future, and what we've learned from this terrible, terrible health crisis. It's scared everyone. That we've learned that our public school system is not responsive, it's inflexible, and it cannot deliver in a crisis. So we have to rethink how we do this. We have to give parents more power and more control, and we will see more excellence and much more learning, I predict, if we do that, if we have the courage to do that. That's what I hope for.
Thank you. How about from Blaine's perspective?
Oh, gosh. I will say in the silver lining of the future, I have been really impressed. I was quite worried, actually, for my children, what was going to happen to them. We have a son who's a senior this year, what was going to be the impact to him. And quite honestly, the kids have been much more resilient, I think, than I was. I think I was a lot more upset about some of the impacts than they've been. But I do think that there has been a lot more engagement on their part as to what the education looks like for them. What does learning mean? But I will say that one thing this really pushed us to do, where it probably would have taken a rollout process and a number of months or years to get all the kids onto technology, it was instant. Yeah. Some of these things that we were really forced to do in the moment have been, in some ways, a leap forward that we wouldn't have taken otherwise. So there have been some silver linings. I think I agree with you about the parents. I have heard from so many of them. They say, "Where's our parents' union? How do we sign up with the parents' union so that someone will listen to us?" So I think that's going to be a big push probably in the legislature. Is parents are going to show up and want to express themselves.
Right. That'd be great. Paul.
Yeah, I like the resilience, student resilience, parent resilience, staff resilience from a Linden Christian perspective and a Linden perspective. That was vital from March 13 when we went home, right? We, from our perspective, a large organization turned on a dime and had people accessing lessons and so forth. I think then that spirals us into just being more flexible in education and being able to change. That's motivated us to see what we could do, and now going forward, see what we should and can do more of for our students' learning and for our community. I think regarding legislation, Leave talked about it from one vantage point. I would agree in the sense of my hope is that there's just more opportunity for school choice.
Right.
I'm a committed citizen of Linden, Whatcom County, and the state of Washington. My tax dollars pay for my son's education in the local public school, and my own income pays for their tuition at Linden Christian. And while I'm okay with that on a lot of levels, I'm not okay with that, and our families aren't either, in that sense of the funding should follow the student, and should be a parent choice for what school. Probably not very popular to say that, I understand, but it's a passion of ours for sure.
Well, let's maybe get someplace where a little different angle on this on the same problem. You all kind of talk about those students that have taken the bull by the horns and done their learning or participated in some option. And really, when I remember being on a school board for the number of years, a lot of the main reasons we were there were for those that needed something a little more provocative than their own self-starting. So is there anything that we can think about doing that, or making sure that those kind of students also get some capability to learn in our new system, in our ideal, wonderful world system?
Well, in an ideal, wonderful world system where parents had control over some of the money, there is that they could use on a innovative private school setting. There is no limit there's only the imagination is our limit on creating new forms of learning for children that far better meets their needs. In Washington State, we have a really serious problem with low-income minority children. We have one of the largest opportunity gaps. That's the academic learning gap between minority children and non-minority children. And they are particularly hurt by a standardized one-size-fits-all system. We don't have enough vocational education. We don't have enough, everybody is slotted to go to college, so that those that don't go to college feel that they've failed, which is a terrible failure of the system in itself. And so I think that's part of the problem, is that we don't have enough choice. I really think school choice would open up this system and make it much better overall. And because you could create schools that are tailored to the needs of the interests of the children as opposed to the convenience of the adults.
Thank you.
Oh, I so agree.
Laura,
I
I'm
think reimagining
having
education
trouble with
is one of my favorite pastimes.
Yes.
And where I think that that we could see some opportunities. You see right now the kids, because for so long we've talked about limiting their screen time, right? So we didn't want to put kids in front of a screen. You wanted them to be doing other things. And so now that we're forced to deliver education on a screen, we've still tried to limit it. So they're only on the screen for 4 hours a day. Well, so the kids are done by 12:30. And my older kids say, well, this is great. Look at all this time I have to do something else. But what could that be? So then you think, well, gee, couldn't that be work experience? Couldn't that be internships? Couldn't that be, doing some other things, hands-on kind of learning? And so one of the projects that we work on here in Whatcom County, it's called Yes Whatcom, and it's really geared towards trying to change that mindset from the kids, that you don't all have to go to college, and from the career counselors to say, I know it's really easy to give all the kids a form for the SAT and a college catalog and say, my job is done. Well, there's a lot more to it, and there's a lot more opportunity. And so that's what we're trying to really make sure the kids can see that. And if you had all those extra hours in the afternoon, imagine, where they could go to expand that real world learning. So I would hope to see some more of that.
Paul.
That's great.
I don't have much to add. That's good.
So how we always get the private schools and the home schools and that kind of thing always kind of get I think the bad rap of they're not taking in students that have special needs, or they're not taking in students that are low or high on the learning scale, or they're not to the year they should be. How do you respond to that kind of thing in the Linden Christian setting?
Yeah, so as a Christian school, we want the full body of Christ to be represented. And that's all levels of learners, all physical abilities, all cognitive abilities, and all talents, and so forth. So we've used the terminology, and it's a common one, of inclusion. So we're a school of inclusion, where we have children with Down syndrome. And other disabilities, cognitive things that of course they struggle with, and so that then, right, is a better representation of this reality and God's world.
Yeah.
And we see that as really important, because one's not better than, one's not less than.
Yeah.
We're all created in the image of God. And so that's extremely important, and a newer venture for Linden Christian over the last 20 years, and a deepened one over the last 5, that we've really committed to that focus, because it isn't. We don't want it to be about the haves and the have-nots, who's good at this and who's better at that, and so forth, but about just Christ-centered Christian education for all kids.
All right. I mean, I'm really sorry that went quite fast. So we're gonna start a round robin for the next 5 minutes or so, and just your final thoughts on where you think we're going, what we can do, how COVID has become special and made things different in how we bring up our children. Leave.
Well, back to the point of the tremendous talent in our state. When the charter school law was passed, the naysayers said, there's nobody interested in opening charter schools. What are you talking about? We don't need to do that. That's too challenging to us. We don't need a new type of streamlined, independently run school like a public charter school. And lo and behold, what did we get? We passed the law, and there were 30 groups that wanted to open charter schools. And every single one of those groups of people had a wonderful, exciting idea about education. And so that's what we have all really been limited by the standardized program of education that we have all been educated by. I really think I could have had a much better education, and all of you could have had too. So that's what I'm hoping for. Better education for all the children.
Laura.
Well, I think what I'm most hopeful for at this point actually is that we could, in the logistically speaking, that we could get rid of the 6-foot rule, that we can get all these kids back into school. I think the longer that they're out of that mindset that you get up in the morning, you get dressed, and then you go and you learn and you interact with other people. I think we as adults, we're coping with it, but we all feel that difference of just seeing people on a screen, and then you're not really sure if they're on the screen and they're also doing something else on the side while they're supposed to be paying attention. The kids really need the interaction, as we adults do too. And I'm hoping if we can get rid of the 6-foot rule, which I think, and all the research and all the things that you've pointed out has shown that it's not impactful in the school setting to do that. It's very impactful in that we can't fit all of the children in the school building.
Right.
So even when we put them back in, they'll be on alternating days, they'll be in, they'll be out, we'll still be out of routine. So I really would like to see that go away so all the kids can get back in school and we can start to chip away at the losses that we've seen. I think the kids are resilient, they're ready, and the sooner we get to it, I think the faster we will move forward.
Awesome. Paul.
Education schools are probably one of the slower organizations to change typically, for good reason. It makes sense in the sense of we want to be really careful and thorough and thoughtful about our children's education. But what's the best thing about this is showing us that we can change and do it well, and bring innovation to the marketplace, bring innovation to our students on behalf of our students, bring innovation for our staff, for our communities. We're a smart, gritty people up here, and we're capable of great things. And so that part to me has been a good, a very meaningful, life-changing experience for many people, for me for sure, to be able to see the organizational change that can happen in a crisis, but then let's not need a crisis
To make it happen.
to make it happen.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
That's great. Thank you very much. If it was back in the day, pre-March, right now you'd be getting just gobs and gobs of applause. People would be standing up in the back, and you would be hearing applause because you did such a great job. And we really appreciate you taking the time to come in and share with everyone that we might be able to hear or see the program on what your thoughts were as parts and members of the community. So thank you very, very much for being here.
thank you for
Thank
having
you
us.
very
Yeah,
much.
thank you.
That's great.
So
All right.
we get one person to clap? Okay.
They were smiling. Some of them, I did notice.
So I don't, I think I'm still on, but.
Have thoughts on that. What a great thing.
Can I what? I was going to introduce Chris, yes. So the panelists were Lee Finney, Laura Mckinney, and Paul Boonstra. Thank you. So we're going to move on here a little bit, and this section of the program is going to be managed and handled by our friend from the Saturday morning show, Chris Halderman.
Good evening to the listening audience. My name is Chris Halterman. I am the host for Saturday Morning Live, and I've had the privilege to put together a panel to talk about public safety and law enforcement, its relationship. So with that, I asked a few people to please participate. Then you're going to get to meet them very shortly. I have asked Whatcom County Sheriff Bill Alfo. We have Deputy Chief Flo Simon from the Bellingham Police Department. We have the Bellingham City Council member, Jean Knudsen, as well as the Executive Director of the Lighthouse Mission Ministries, Hans Ursugar Davis. And we're going to start out by letting each one of them. I think everybody pretty much knows who all of you are. Maybe anybody that's outside of Whatcom County doesn't. But what I'd really like each of you to do is just to spend 2 or 3 minutes talking to the listening audience about your thoughts about the relationship between public safety and law enforcement. What does that mean to you? What does that look like? So I'm going to turn it over and start with you, Sheriff Alfo.
Well, first, I'd like to thank Common Threads and Fourth Corner Northwest for sponsoring the event and inviting us here tonight. It's an honor to be here and share my thoughts. Our community expects and demands, first of all, that law enforcement is there to protect them when they need it against any threat that's there. They expect the officers will act with compassion, they'll act professionally, that they're well trained, and they're very skilled in what they do. And I think that's what reflects what goes on in all the law enforcement agencies in Whatcom County. I think we hear a lot of rhetoric about other parts of the country and people trying to take those issues that are occurring multiple time zones away and extrapolate them as being a systemic problem in our own community and point their finger at the police. I don't think we have those problems. We could always improve. We could always do better, but I'm pretty proud of the men and women of the Sheriff's Office and all the police officers here locally in our community. And I think that's reflected through the careful selection of officers. That's very essential. The training they're provided, and that we hold them, and more importantly, their fellow officers hold them accountable for everything that they do. Everything we try to accomplish at the Sheriff's Office, and we try to be consistent with our values of excellence, integrity, and teamwork. We've heard a lot about alternatives to jail and having the people in the social service field taking over some of the law enforcement functions. And from my perspective, we welcome that in cases where that can safely be done. But the majority of the calls we respond to involving people with behavioral health issues involve people that are dangerous. And to try to change gears a little bit in how we handle that and not put everybody in jail, because we found that's not a solution when we see the number of people have been booked multiple times. We've come up with a number of programs. We have mental health deputies that are specially trained to deal with people in mental health crisis, and they integrate into the social services here in Whatcom County with the GRACE program, with the Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion program, and others. We have adopted models of community policing where we have officers serving the communities on a permanent basis or on an annual or like a 2-year basis, and they get to know the problems in those communities and help the citizens. That's our neighborhood deputy and resident deputy programs. We hear a lot about, having armored vehicles and SWAT teams, and a lot of thought that from people that's not necessary and that's overkill. Well, it's not. We deploy those teams about 9 times a year in Whatcom County, but whenever we do, we send a crisis negotiation team with them, and in 95% of the cases, the crisis negotiators are able to peaceably resolve the situations without anyone being injured or without the use of bodily force. We try to form partnerships with other social service agencies here in the county, know where they are. GRACE has been great in helping us navigate that system and make it better, but I'm glad to see you have Hans here from the Lighthouse mission. We work closely with them and just a variety of programs. So I think my 2 minutes are up.
Yes. Next, we're going to hear from Deputy Chief of the Bellingham Police Department, Flo Simon. Your understanding of the relationship between public safety and law enforcement.
Thank you very much, Chris. I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I echo Sheriff Elfo's sentiments on law enforcement and public safety. I think to have public safety, you have to have law enforcement. I've been in the business going on 32 years next week, and I can tell you things have changed a lot in Bellingham, but I couldn't be more proud of the men and women that serve the Bellingham Police Department, the Whatcom County Sheriff's Office, and our partners, in that we are so much farther ahead than a lot of agencies. When you hear about the defunding movement and what that entails, what they're trying to do, de-escalation training, we go through 40 hours of de-escalation. We have ongoing training on that. When you talk about transparency in our agency, we've worked hard to do that. We work hard to employ men and women who have the values of the community. We spend a lot of time researching those folks, and we hire the best people. We provide them with the best training, because the quality of life in Bellingham is important to all of us. And so I think that to have a well-trained police department costs a lot of money. Yes, it does. But you have one of the best in the country, and I would put them up against anybody. Thank you.
Okay. Next up will be Bellingham City Council Member Jean Knudsen. Your understanding, you guys are, you're front line for all of this. So if you could share your thoughts, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris, and thank you, everybody. It's really a pleasure to be here. I'm so happy to be somewhere and not on a Zoom call right now. Since March, it's been nothing but Zoom, and I'm about zoomed out. But I'm really happy to be here. You know, one of the number one goals and number one charges of the Bellingham City Council is public safety. We're in charge of making sure that the citizens of Bellingham are safe. And as you know, law enforcement is under assault not only in the United States, but right here in Whatcom County. And I'm sitting with two of the finest right now. And one of the things that I'm very happy to announce right now is that the mayor came out with his preliminary budget. 0 defunding of the Bellingham Police Department. And I hope that the Bellingham City Council, certainly I will, and I hope the rest of them will too, follow his lead. There's a lot of wonderful people in that department, and as I said last Monday, you know, there's been a few things happen nationwide that are really starting to raise eyebrows. But what happened here in our own community about 3 weeks ago, when there was a demonstration in front of the police department, and they had a bunch of people show up, protesters show up, and they had a piñata dressed up as a pig in a police uniform. And the people in that building had to watch that. Well, I had had enough, and last Monday I got up at the council meeting and pretty much let them have it. That is not Bellingham. It's not Whatcom County. And I feel confident that as this budget process goes on, we will resist defunding the police and continue to support as they do need it. We send them out into harm's way every day. Sometimes when they put on a uniform, they never, sometimes they're, it's just a tough situation. But I think we're strong enough here in Bellingham that we will resist that and not do it at all.
And then up next is the Executive Director for the Lighthouse Mission Ministries, Hans Ursugar Davis. You've got a much different perspective. It's like you're on the other side of the counter with this issue. So share your thoughts on, especially with the people that you deal with on a daily basis and how that can contribute to public safety and work as a good partnership with law enforcement.
You bet. Thanks, Chris, for having me. Yeah, we at the mission are engaging probably around 2,500 unique individuals on an annual basis, people experiencing homelessness or poverty in some way that need the help of the mission. And we have a lot of different types of services engaging people at different sort of stages of life recovery. And as we walk with people out of homelessness, we often find people involved in the justice system. And we often see our staff and our guests needing the services of the police, coming in, engaging our folks. If they're having real behavior challenges, it's really important that we have that. The mission and our staff at the mission really have to be, we can't be the police at all. We really have to be advocates. And what we see are people with real trust issues coming through our doors. People distrusting of institutions in general. They don't trust the hospital. They don't trust the police. They don't trust us as an institution. And it's a real challenge to win that trust back. And so if people come in, they might have a warrant, for example, out for their arrest. Our aim is to get them to want to turn themselves in and address the warrant. And that's more of a heart issue. Of course, we want justice to be done, and we want to work with somebody. But as long as they're not a significant danger to themselves or others in that moment, we want to work with them to get them to that place of heart change and life transformation where they want that sort of thing. But we need the police, and we are big fans of the police here in Bellingham. We could not do the work without their presence and their support. And so, you asked the question of where does public safety and law enforcement come together? Like, it comes together at the mission and in the lives of the people that we are working with there that to us are incredibly precious people that need a lot of support. And law enforcement's a big part of that for us. And without it, we would probably be working with far fewer people. That 2,500 would be far less because we just couldn't let a good portion of people in the doors due to the challenges that they bring with them.
So we're going to kind of have more of a good conversation amongst one another. Not necessarily that we're going to go back and forth, but just if you want to contribute on what we're talking about, I think that's the best way to handle this. So we know that there's this national movement that we've all seen to defund the police. So I really hope that both Sheriff Elfo and Deputy Chief Slow will talk to this. What does that mean to your organization when you have this national movement? I realize, and I commend you, Councilmember Knudsen, for that. But speaking, we're not just talking about Whatcom County here. We're talking about the state of Washington and our nation and our, what does that mean when it comes to public safety and it comes to the ability for people like myself and everyone in this room here to be able to go out and lead their daily lives?
Well, I think most of the law enforcement agencies, certainly the sheriff's office, have very few discretionary funds in their budget. And when we're told to take significant budget cut, that means reducing the number of deputy sheriffs that are out on the street, enforcing the law and protecting our community. We're in the middle of a budget process now, and we are looking at cuts, but they don't relate to the defund the police movement. They relate more to COVID and the projections they're making for revenues for next year for the county. But we want people want the mental health deputies, and they want neighborhood and community deputies, and we defund that. That's, they're gone, and we have less protection for the people. And the other is if we're going to maintain professional policing here in our community, we need the funding for the appropriate training. We need to have salaries where we attract qualified people to work here. and we need to be able to support our people in what they do and make sure they have the right equipment to do the job safely and reduce some of the interactions we've seen in other parts of our nation.
Deputy Chief?
Yeah, I would agree with that. You've seen what happened in Seattle when they called for defunding. That's a loss of 100 positions. That's basically what defunding means, is we lose personnel, because that is the biggest portion of our budget is personnel benefits and training. And so when you talk about percentage cuts, that's where it comes from. There is no extra meat in our budgets to deal with the mental health issues. There's no extra money to deal with the homelessness issues. We spend a lot of overtime dealing with those kind of things. So there's no extra fat to trim.
No, and you guys work off of contracts as well, so you don't get to just walk in and say, oh, by the way, you're going to take a 25% cut.
Right.
It doesn't work that way. Councilmember Knudsen, speaking to people out there, not only in our community, but maybe in the state or the nation, how should, because the council is the legislative body of our city, how should you look at that from a budget perspective in order to be able to provide the public safety, the law enforcement necessary, and then not, damage the economy as we're dealing with the COVID? And what are your thoughts on that?
And what's happened in Portland and Seattle is just unconscionable as far as I'm concerned. I mean, what they're doing in those cities is absolutely unbelievable. But like I said before, our charge is public safety, and we have to look at a whole budget. But when it comes to the police department and the fire department, they're into saving lives every single day. That would be the last place I'd ever look to make big, huge cuts. When we had the economic downturn in 2008, 2009, everybody suffered, but I don't even use the word defund, especially at our council meetings. And I've asked the council not to use it either, and they've been pretty good about that. We get sometimes 50 calls a week from people out talking about defunding the police. Well, they've quit calling me because I've told them I'm not interested in that. So that's died down on my end, but I know the others are getting a lot of it, and it's really strong. I mean, it's nationwide and it's here too, but we just have to stand up to it and say no and keep doing what we're doing.
Do you want to address, since I know that you've just recently started, you approved to have some hearings on an unarmed 911, excuse me, task force. What would that mean, and how would you possibly fit that into a budget and not impact, what's going on with our Whatcom County Sheriff or our Bellingham Police Department?
Yeah, and the mayor integrated that in his budget by going with 3 officers to join the GRACE program, which was created by Bellingham and Whatcom County, and Bellingham Police Department, Fire Department, and people who are in that business. So that's where that's going to come from. It's only going to be 3. That'll give us 4 of those type of officers. And I don't think it's going to be a different. When you call 911, you're going to get the same dispatcher. The call might go somewhere else, but it's not going to be. It was perceived as being a big shift where we were going to create a new 911 center. That's not going to happen at all. So the GRACE program's been around for a while. I know Bill and Flo know a lot about it, and that's where we're going to put more money. We spend right now $140,000 a year on it. That'll probably go up to about $300,000 a year, and it won't be coming out of the police budget.
So Hans, when it comes to 911, I know you guys have had to use it at times. Mm-hmm. You've got the drop-in center where you allow people to come in. It has a lower border as far as for entry into, as per se, your programs. So talk a little bit about how you deal with that and interact with law enforcement and help in a situation, and the need for it.
So we work very often with the police coming in, especially at that kind of level of care that we provide. So we do our outreach. We go out to the tent cities. We go out on the streets. We try and build friendship and trust with folks to get them in to base camp, the former drop-in center. And base camp is considered a low barrier center for the homeless. Yeah, it's
can you explain what the difference is of that as opposed to somebody who actually enters into a program? There's a lot of people in the listening audience that don't understand the difference in that low barrier.
Yeah, you bet. So a low barrier tries to remove as many barriers as possible to just get somebody in the doors. And for us, it's us trying to reach people where they're at whatever life stage that they might be in, with whatever kind of help they need to get them progressing and moving forward up and out of homelessness and whatever life dysfunctions have them there. And the stage after that, people oftentimes go into what we call our Agape Home or our Ascent program, and those are addiction recovery programs, clean and sober, designed. They're about a year and a half long program that's designed to really allow people to deal with those deeper wounds in their life that have them needing to use to anesthetize the pain in their life. And it's also designed to give life skills and all these other sorts of things, and workplace development, all these things. So the level where we work with the police a lot, though, is that base camp level, because people are coming in crisis. They either it's really cold out, or they've been in a fight in their tent city that they're in, and they're trying to escape. We also get folks that we had an elderly man call me the other day just saying, hey, my business is shutting down due to COVID, and I don't have any resources or any friends. I might need to stay at your place. What does this look like? And so we get a pretty wide range of people coming in with different levels of motivation. But the interaction with the police there is really good in that our staff have a lot of trust with our guests. And sometimes a guest, especially a guest maybe with some serious mental health going on, will look to the staff and say, is it okay for me to interact with this police officer that's here to see me? Because we have the trust. And there are times where people don't trust when they see a uniform or a badge, and it's a real challenge for them. And so to have, in a sense, an intermediary that allows them to bridge that trust gap is really helpful. And the police are there to support that person. And occasionally it might be an issue where someone's feeling suicidal, or maybe somebody was assaulted in the park, and they're there to get help, but they're still kind of afraid to interact with authority figures. And so, yeah, that's, we call 911, people show up. If there's a weapon involved, which is pretty rare in our facility, but if it is, the police show up like that. And we're very thankful for that, because that's, safety is a top priority for us.
This is something that's been on the top of my mind, and I know that sometimes in order to save money, I guess, through budget processes, it seems like we add more onto our public service. And one of those things I'm wondering is, are we asking too much of law enforcement, to handle too many different things, have too many hats, wear too many hats? Is that something that you feel is has been asked of you that you don't have? Maybe you're being asked to do too much, when you're dealing with mental health issues, and you're dealing with homeless issues, and you're dealing with criminal cases, 911 calls, all those things. How do you feel about that?
Well, we're a full-service law enforcement agency, but dealing with folks that are in mental health crisis that don't necessarily need law enforcement intervention, that's something that could possibly be done more efficiently by people in the social service field. And I think a lot of them are already. The ones that come to attention of law enforcement are the ones that are the issue. I know that Whatcom County is planning on opening a 32-bed crisis stabilization center where we'll be able to pick someone up in a mental health crisis or a substance abuse crisis and take them for treatment as an alternative for jail for minor, if they've committed a nonviolent and minor offense. And I think that's going to be a great tool if it stays functional as the way it was originally planned and presented. That will be a big help for law enforcement, not having to deal with people for hours. We could pick them up, take them there, get the help they need, and be back on to doing the other things that we do. So I think that's an improvement that's come about in our community.
Deputy Chief Simon, same thing with you, and if you would maybe address a little bit that unarmed 911 task force. What's your understanding of that, and how do you feel like that's just going to be another level added on to the responsibility of the Bellingham Police Department? Are you being asked to take on too many hats?
Well, when it comes to the unarmed 911, I'm not quite sure where that's going to go. But what I think it is the behavioral health officers that respond with the caseworkers will be responding to more of those mental health calls. Our officers are being tasked with a lot when it comes to social issues. You know, when I came on, we hardly dealt with any mentally ill people or even people experiencing homelessness. Fast forward 30 plus years, and we're seeing those numbers increase. No, we'll never get out of that business because we're open 24/7, and who are you going to call in the middle of the night but law enforcement to deal with that? But I do think that there will be some sort of a unarmed response to some of those calls.
I guess sometimes I think that, yes, mental health doesn't necessarily mean that they need to go to jail or go to prison, but that doesn't mean that it's any less dangerous.
Right. Right.
So the GRACE program, what exactly is the GRACE program, and who's the best person here to talk about that?
Probably Bill or Flo.
Okay.
Well, it's an acronym for Ground Response and Community Engagement, and it's a health department program. It's not a sheriff's office program, although we partner to support it and make sure it succeeds. But they have a broad segment of the community that were involved in the formation and on the committee that oversees it. And the idea is to divert some of the highest users of law enforcement services or firefighting EMS type calls and get them into some of the existing services that already exist. And I know our mental health deputies, they're out there, families are distressed, they have a loved one that has some mental health issue and they deal with them time and time again. They don't necessarily want them to go to jail. So our deputies go out, develop relationships with these people, talk them into either having a GRACE person come out to their home and speak with them, or bringing them in to meet with the person and getting them into some type of service that can help resolve the issue outside the scope of the criminal justice system.
And Hans, does your organization, do they work with GRACE?
Yeah, we work closely with Grace. Base Camp, Grace is always down there helping us out and working with our people that, like Bill said, are the high utilizers of services, and really brings a team approach and kind of a multi-faceted intervention, I guess, into people's lives that helps divert them from needing some of the more hardcore interventions.
Next, I kind of want to talk a little bit about the social contract. What we all think is it's sort of a nebulous agreement for society to follow the laws that are enacted by our local, state, and national policy makers. So if a large segment of the population continues to break a law or laws, does that mean that that these laws not only are hard to enforce, but maybe should they be rescinded? Why or why not? You know, just thinking about that. Are we maybe creating too many laws that creates a lot of conflict? But is that a good idea to take a look at that? I mean, sometimes as time goes by, and you realize you're spending an awful lot of time on this and taking a look at the public safety. Is this a public safety? Was this a good law?
Well, I think that I'm a strong believer in the separation of powers. We have an executive, legislative, and judicial branch, and our job is to enforce the law consistent with the resources that we have to do that, and it's the legislature's job to decide if a law is a just law, or if it no longer makes sense, then they repeal it. Some of the things we do see, though, is that the legislature enacts new laws that create mandates for law enforcement and doesn't provide the funding necessarily to get those things accomplished, unfunded mandates. And I could give lots of examples. A lot of them are around the domestic violence laws, for example, or missing children, and it's all well intended, but if you're going to add another job on an already overburdened system, you need to provide the resources so we can effectively enforce those laws or execute the duties that we have under those laws.
And that's true. Sheriff and Deputy Chief, your mission is to uphold the laws that Councilmember Knudsen puts into effect. So what are your thoughts on this?
My thoughts are almost the same as the sheriff's. If we start to rescind laws, then it kind of eats away at the quality of life that we've come to know. I know one of the things that's being looked at by the prosecutor's office is driving while license suspended in the 3rd degree and getting rid of that. The only problem I see with that is usually when somebody has their license suspended, they also have no insurance, right? And so that's not fair to the motorist who has insurance and gets in an accident with
I can attest to
a
that,
driver
yes.
who has no license and no insurance. So I'm sure there's some laws that we could look at that we would be okay if the city council rescinded or the legislatures. But yeah, I'm not too in favor of rescinding laws.
And I'm not asking people to do that, but are you communicating really well with one another and saying, hey, we're having a lot of this happen, and is it really in the public's interest? And when you are creating new regulations, regulations are laws, RCWs, they're laws. Do you guys spend time thinking about what's this going to cost us? What's it going to cost the society and the economy?
Well, to give you an example, last Monday night we just passed for the first round some non-sitting laws around the base camp. And we're taking a lot of heat from that. People are calling us all sorts of names about that. But that's just one law that we pass. No, we have to take everything into consideration. But one of the things I've never done since I've been on the council, and most councils and mayors haven't done it, is try to monopolize the police department and run it themselves. We have a great police chief. We have great police officers. They can do the job, and they need to just let them do their job. Just to give you an example, here a few weeks ago, I really got angry when protesters marched to the mayor's house. To me, nobody in that neighborhood other than the mayor ran for office. The neighbors don't need to be around that kind of thing. And that would have been an instant where I probably would have differed with Seth and said, no, they're not going to march up to my neighborhood. We'll stop them. But he let it, and he handled it his way, and that's fine. He's the mayor. I'm not going to argue with him. But there's so many things going on now that I see Seattle wants to rescind ticketing any bicyclists for going through a stop sign. They want the stop sign to be a yield sign so they can go through it. They do it all the time anyway. I mean, they don't stop at stop signs. But that's just another example of you could pass laws that really hurt the police department. And we, over the last few years, have had to hire at least 2 new police officers every year to catch up what we lost during the last deep recession. So we probably need more police officers right now, and we are asking them to do a whole lot of things.
And I will ask you, I do know that you do have a lot of retirees coming up this
Yes.
year. I just went to a retirement party yesterday.
Yes.
A 37-year veteran.
Yes.
So it was, thanked him very much so for all of the service. And I
Right.
really respect him. And he's put in a lot of time. And so how are you guys dealing with this? Is it affecting you? All of this public opinion and all of this media attention, how's that going?
Yeah, so the Silver Tsunami is what we call it. It was when President Carter was in office and he advocated for more officers. Those officers are now eligible to retire. And we're looking at, 12 to 14 people retiring in 2021. And it takes us about a year to get somebody hired and through the academy and on their own. We currently have 3 officers that are hired that have academy dates in January. So it's a long process, and so we're meeting regularly to figure out how we're going to deal with the shortage on the street, because there will be a shortage. And we have taken from other units, we've disbanded units. We're getting to the point where we don't have a lot of people to take from other units and put on the road. So we're hoping that we get a list of laterals that are willing to come here, that are what we're looking for to fill that void.
But you'll have the budget. The main thing is just getting enough people. But so many of them leaving at one time and then needing to have the resources to get them in, get them trained, evaluated, et cetera.
Correct, and getting the pool. When I was hired, there were 300 applicants. Now we're lucky if we get 15 people on a list. So it's hard. Everybody is competing for the same people, and we try to race each other to make them offers, don't we, Sheriff?
Yeah.
And it's such a lovely community.
It is.
It really is.
But you really have to have a reason to come here.
Yes. So we've got about 7 minutes left. So I want to finish up with a really important piece of this panel discussion: restoring the public's confidence in just application of the law and law enforcement. What does that look like to you? And I'm going to start with you, Hans, because you work with that with the homeless and trying to establish confidence and letting, trust. I mean, confidence is an integral part of trust.
What I find effective is baby steps, right? Just like in What About Bob? You had to do baby steps. And there's this sense that you have to have positive interactions. You got to have many interactions that you see the fruit of the relationship from, and you can start to cultivate that trust over time. And I think it is real. There are people that feel deeply hurt and by the justice system, and have deep concerns about it. And so, how do you rectify that? That is my sense. Is you got to start spending time with people, and be a safe presence where they feel that anything they say in the court of law isn't going to be used against them, kind of thing. And so that's my sense.
Council members Knudsen?
Yes, one of the things that a lot of people don't understand, we spend at least $4.5 million on social issues, on homelessness and mental health and a lot of other things. But the biggest thing that comes to my mind is the Bellingham City Council and all councils around the country and all legislatures and everything else need to support their law enforcement. They really do. The things that are being asked of us to do to a police department is just, I didn't think I'd ever see it in my time on the council, and I've been on there for 27 years now. And I have many sleepless nights thinking about what's going on out there, but I have great confidence that we're going to do the right thing this budget year, and hopefully when COVID's over, because every department is being affected by COVID now a little bit. We're not doing as bad as we thought we were going to be budget-wise. We look like we're only going to have to use $1.8 million out of our reserves, which we have a healthy reserve, but we just need to stand by our law enforcement people and let people know that they're out there for them. And that's, lastly, I'll just say, there's been a lot of talk about an advisory board to oversee. The only reason I want to see that is let those people spend a year with the police department and they'll know how good they are. That's the only reason I'll support it.
Deputy Chief, I'd like you to talk about that also, and I'm going to just ask one extra thing of both you and Sheriff Elfo. Is there any legislation down in Olympia that they're talking about that you are concerned about as well? So talking about public confidence, restoring trust, or making sure that it's there, what does that look like? How do you achieve it? And is there anything going on in Olympia that's of concern to you right now?
So the mission of the Bellingham Police Department is committed to community, and I think that's a very important thing, is that you have to know your community, you have to communicate with them, you have to build trust with them, you have to put credits in the bank so that when something does happen that is off, you have people that are willing to come to talk to you about it and not be angry with you about it, but to have discussions about that kind of thing. I think we've done a good job in the last few years, decades, of putting those credits in the bank. And it really does come down to relationships and getting to know different people in different neighborhoods and being out there, being visible and being approachable.
How's that been during COVID?
Well, like Jean said, I've had a lot of Zoom meetings, so it's harder during COVID for sure. And as far as anything going on down in Olympia, I think they're in the infancy stages of looking at what reform would look like and what they want to focus on. So currently, I'm not concerned with anything that they're looking at. I watched that 2-hour show the other day, and all the things that they're talking about is what we're all talking about, evidence-based ideas.
Yeah. Sheriff Elfo, same to you.
I agree 100% with what Flo said, but I'll add, it's a difficult time for law enforcement. The officers out on the street feel sometimes they're under attack because they hear these national trends and people marching through the streets and as Jean mentioned, having 2-year-old children beat piñatas dressed as police officers. But I could tell you, I've been in law enforcement a long, long time, and I have never seen the wave of support, words of encouragement. We have lines of people coming in the lobby every day. I put on more weight than I don't need to put on for the food they're bringing in, just expressing their support, children coming in, elderly people coming in, and we accommodate them, COVID or no COVID. We find a way to work through it, and cards, letters, emails. There's a segment that really is buying into that we're basically evil and the problems and that are inherent in Minneapolis Police Department, apparently they must exist here too, and that's just not the case. But I could tell you that the good people of our community, and there's lots of them, support good and effective law enforcement.
And I will tell you, as a business person, if you do one thing wrong as a business person, not that anybody wants to, you will hear about it immediately, and it will just gets passed on like water. But it isn't yet. We don't take enough time to just stop and say thank you. Thank you for everything that you do, for the services that you provide, and the way that you allow all of us to go out and live our daily lives in as much ease as possible. And it looks like I'm pretty much out of time, and I want to thank everybody on this panel very, very much. At this point in time, I'm going to be handing it over to Vincent Buys for our very next segment, which is going to be on COVID and its effect on the economy of Washington State. So please, if Vince would step up. We're going to do our little switch and our cleanup. And Vince, you've got a great panel coming up, so why don't you take it over and let everybody know what's happening.
All right, well, I appreciate it, Chris, and thank you, everybody, for joining us. My name is Vincent Buys. I'm a former state representative here in Whatcom County. I'm pleased to be bringing this panel to get to you, talking about the financial effects of COVID-19 on both the local government and the state government. And I've got a number of great guests with us this evening. And while they're getting seated, I'm going to kind of introduce them. And we're going to start with Mark Harmsworth. Mark Harmsworth is actually a former colleague of mine. He's a former state representative from the Mill Creek area down in North Seattle. Basically everything outside of Bellingham to the south is like Seattle to people in Whatcom County. So Mark Harmsworth, former state representative. He's also with the Washington Policy Center now, and he's their director for Center of Small Business. And then we have with us Skagit County Commissioner Ron Wiesen. He's right down the next county over. A great advocate for things down the county, fourth generation farmer, big advocate for agriculture community down there. And then we have our favorite Linden City Mayor, Scott Korheis, newly retired, not from city mayor, but from his real job, the other one. So, gentlemen, I appreciate you coming on the panel tonight, and we'll just start with a generic question. What are the obvious financial impacts? COVID's been shut down our businesses. It's shut down. Essentially our economy here in Washington State for the last 6 months. What are the obvious impacts that you're seeing? Mark, we'll start with you. Small business in general in Washington State. What does that look like?
Well, thanks for having me out tonight. It's great to be here. I think one of the toughest things we've seen, particularly for small business, is the obviously we had the initial lockdown of several months, and that certainly affected things. But long-term predictability. So we're seeing businesses now that have been in this lockdown situation for 3, 4, 5 months in some cases, and they're struggling to figure out how to use this as a new business model. If you take a restaurant industry, for example, shut down for 2 or 3 months, started to adjust for curbside pickup. Now they're at 50% capacity with some restrictions on masks and so forth. Some of these restaurants, and I sat down with a restaurant owner. He has around 24 employees. He's a bar and grill, so he's able to serve alcohol, which you may not know, but the profit margin on alcohol is a lot higher than food. Food's around 3%. And so in a 50% capacity, it's literally touch and go if he makes it each month. So what you're seeing in the restaurant side of things is the ones that were solvent, that don't have large lease payments, that didn't have a lot of debt, that weren't just starting, are doing okay, but they're just about holding it together. I know of other businesses that had just expanded and they're already shut down. And so they need predictability on when the economy is going to go. For other small businesses, retailers, it's the same type of thing. If they were somewhat solvent before this thing started, they're doing okay. But they can't stay locked down forever, and many of them have eaten up their savings, and they need some predictability around when are we going to reopen. If they know they're going to be in 6 weeks, we can get back to 75, 100% capacity, I think they'll take the risk. But without that predictability, you're going to see a lot of famous names go down, unfortunately, and that's what we're seeing just from the employment perspective. And there are many other issues I know we're going to talk about tonight as well.
Well, and obviously that economic impact has a trickle down going down to the county level and the local level, local government level. Commissioner Wiesen, what are you seeing kind of at the macro level of counties across the state, but then at the micro level down in Skagit County?
Yeah, as mentioned, thank you very much for having us here today. I really appreciate this chance to come up and talk to you about what we're doing in Skagit County. We're just starting our preliminary budget meetings next week with all our different departments and going through what their budgets are. But one of our initial responses, just because of the way the sales tax numbers in Skagit County as of end of September, we're only down 3%. So sales tax wasn't as bad as we anticipated early on. And some of that could be because of the more people are shopping online and getting things delivered at home. Our real estate sales are doing really well. Our construction is still doing well. But one of the things that was really hit was our tourism industries. The Tulip Festival and all that was all ready to go. We had one of the bulb farmers had tulips in the truck going to different stores to be delivered. But we had the shutdown and they just shipped those trucks back. So that's a huge economic downfall on that particular business. But as local government, we have property tax can only go up to 1% levy, and cost of living is generally 2%. So we've got this thing going like this. We're getting a big wedge, and so that is one of the issues that's going to be facing us going through balancing our budget for next year. So.
Mayor Cordes, what are you seeing kind of here in Whatcom County? We've got a number of small cities. You meet with the small cities on a regular basis. All the small cities meet together. What are you hearing from small cities, and specifically, what is the financial outlook of Linden right now because of COVID?
Well, I hope I represent the small cities well. And Vince, thank
You
you
always
for,
do.
thanks for having me here tonight. So I guess sales tax is the one that everybody worries about the most. And in Linden, we're doing reasonably well. We're down about 4% for the year right now. And we've had some really good months the past 3 months, but we had some really poor months earlier on. March, April, May, June didn't look so good. But that's behind us, let's hope, and now we're moving forward. The real concern in the county isn't the Lindens, the Ferndales, the Bellinghams. It's Sumas and Blaine. They're on the border. Destination sales tax has been wonderful for all of us. We've gotten a lot more sales tax coming to our cities because it's based on the destination of where it's going. Sumas and Blaine in particular had these box businesses set up that Canadians would come across, pick up goods, and go home. Those cities got all that sales tax revenue. The borders shut down. So all of that revenue's gone away. So Blaine and Sumas in particular are hurting. And so as small cities, as a county, we have CARES money that we can spend. Some of it we're shifting a little bit more to those cities, or trying to in ways that are effective to help them out in their time of need. We also had cash flow delay with property taxes, which really didn't affect us, but it's always worrisome when you see something as regular as property taxes not come in on time. That's worrisome. I think there's other fiscal impacts in our cities and probably in all of our governments, all of our businesses. It's I'll call it the fatigue of COVID. We've got families that worry about their health, they're worried about their kids, their schools, whatever. All of this is affecting their productivity on the job. Their mind isn't there all the time, and I think, so you see a reduction in productivity, which is cost to a city. And finally, I'm worried about the unemployed, particularly the ones in the service industries, the restaurants, the retail shops. They're the lowest tier, often lower paid. I think so many of the professional people are doing just fine through this whole thing, but it's that lower end. And I'm a little worried that our sales tax numbers are all looking good because we had unemployment, which was $600 a week for a lot of people, and they probably enjoyed spending it. But that's not happening anymore. And so it's going to be interesting as we move into the fall and winter now to see what happens to all of our numbers. So we're cautiously optimistic, but we're prepared for the worst.
Do you believe, or are you seeing any evidence of kind of a tsunami of defaults, whether it's mortgage or rents or that type of stuff that's going to have an impact on whether it's property values or, in the business side? Are you going to be seeing a whole lot of business properties all of a sudden coming up with open leases because these businesses, they couldn't make their mortgage payments, so they couldn't make their lease payments for a while. Citizens couldn't make their rent payments. We saw that there's right now, I think in Washington State, there's a rent holiday where if you can't pay your rent, you can't be kicked out. When that goes away, what is that impact going to be to our local communities or our local businesses.
Yeah, I think you've sort of identified the key issue there. A lot of homes in our state are owned by families. It was typically their first home, their starter home. They moved into another home and turned their first home into a renter. And that home is now being rented. And because of the state-mandated moratorium, you've got a situation where somebody who may have lost their job now isn't receiving the $600, and the ESD, the Employment Security Department, is backlogged even on getting the next phase of the unemployment through, are unable to pay. These are individuals. These aren't corporations. They're not some sort of mega rich person in the sky, if you like. These are just regular people that the rent is needed to pay the mortgage on that first home. And that money's gone away. And what I think you're about to see is, like you said, not a tsunami, but I think you'll start seeing these foreclosures. Now, what I've been monitoring is the numbers. There's two reasons you can evict people under the eviction moratorium right now. You're either going to move into the house yourself, or you're going to be forced to sell it. And the latter of those two, I think, is going to start happening as these families get to the end of 6-7 months. Imagine paying twice your mortgage for 7 months. And now they're looking at it going, well, now we've got to set it. Plus, because property demand is so high right now outside of Seattle, because let's face it, no one wants to live in a war zone. Everyone's moving out, forcing up the property values. People are looking at that thinking, hey, I can actually maybe turn that rental now into a little bit of equity profit and invest that somewhere else later once we know kind of how the economy is going to go. I think you're going to start seeing that, maybe not right now, but certainly in the spring there will be a lot of activity in that space.
Do you see any impacts at the city level or county level?
I agree with Mark on that. One of the things that Skagit County has had a very low vacancy rate, and so we just did not have many apartments or units available, and it was less than 1%. It was one of the worst in the state. And you have people that aren't getting rent coming in, and they're not able to get a renter in to pay them. So how is that going to work? And so you look down the road another 6-8 months. If it goes on that long, they'll be bankrupt or selling their property and so forth. And so our vacancy rate is going to get worse, as far as I'm concerned.
So, yeah, the rental market, I think, well, I have some rental properties and my wife manages it all, and she pays attention to it. And really, if anything comes up in and around Linden, it's gone. So I think that market is very strong, very robust. And as far as I know, I haven't heard of many landlords complaining about renters taking advantage of them not paying. I mean, generally people are trying to pay, and I think landlords, if you're a good landlord, you take the time and effort to make sure that you keep your person in there and help them through a downtime, because you're probably doing reasonably well compared to how they're doing as a landlord. The housing shortage, I think the building slowdown that most of the state experienced earlier this spring didn't help our inventory, and that's coming now to a housing crisis. And it's just some of the policies that the state's put on us is driving people to communities like Linden or Whatcom County, let's say, as opposed to Seattle. And I think we're feeling that crunch. People are getting out of some of those highly urbanized areas and finding our areas wonderful. Meanwhile, we're not really poised to grow like we probably could, and maybe we don't want to either.
Well, and Mayor Corrales, you bring up a good point about, so the construction and the impact, and you're kind of right on the front line of that as the mayor of Linden, because you were one of the first cities that, when the governor mandate said that all construction has to shut down except that construction, which is union, that has a huge impact on small communities, those contractors and the ones that do the individual homes. But you as mayor, you kind of came out and said, look, if it's safe to be out on a union construction site, a large-scale construction site, it's safe to have 1 or 2 people out on a whole home site. But that has had an impact on home
we
availability.
tried to keep construction going in Linden, and one of the rules was you could keep working to minimize damage on site or damage to your structure, and we basically said we broadly understand what that means. And anyway, we made it through that fine, and our builders basically kept going through the whole thing, which was, I think, we've seen some benefit of that, and probably sales tax wise as well.
So shifting gears a little bit, the panel before us was talking about public safety. Obviously, one of the biggest cost drivers for a city budget or a county budget is public safety. What are you seeing as a result of COVID, finances being down, as it relates to your ability to provide public safety?
I'll start. I have a fire department and a police department, and we're just going through the budget process. We're not cutting their budgets, either one, or cutting people in any way. So we're keeping them fully funded, because it's really one of our primary duties as government is public safety, and so we want to make sure that that is funded to the point where our citizens are taken care of. And we do have broad support for both our police and fire department in Linden. I noticed, Bill, the sheriff said that he was gaining weight because of all the food coming in. The Linden PD has the same problem. There's just lots of food coming into that organization. So, yeah, we're planning to fully fund these things. And really, has crime come with this? Not really. I mean, we've seen a small spike in theft in Linden, which is unusual, but it had really to do with the unemployment payments and fraud, and people had to turn their claims into their local community. So other than that, no real spikes in crime in Linden. And as far as I know from the other small cities, it's similar. We're all funding as much as we possibly can through this in the county.
Yeah, in Skagit County, I agree. We're trying to make sure we maintain our sheriff's office and so forth. One of the issues we have is our community justice center is funded by a 3/10 sales tax. And so we have had, the sheriff has reduced the inmate population from like 2.25 down to like 135. And so trying to make sure we don't get COVID inside that, our jail. And so they've been very successful in doing that, but because of that, there are more people back out on the street with potential warrants. And with our court system, the way they haven't really been operating full capacity, we aren't getting as much fees or fines and so forth coming in also. So that's another thing that's going to hit us when we start going through the budget, because we aren't able to get that type of fees and so forth coming off the criminal justice system.
So Mark Harmsworth, from a business perspective, businesses have really been hit by the 1-2 punch of, at least at the statewide level, of first the COVID, the shutdowns, and then when you're talking about some of our downtown urban areas, Tacoma, Seattle, Portland. Portland's that other state we don't talk about. But what are businesses feeling as far as they're being strained on the finances, but then even if they're able to get open, I mean, I can't recall how many times a Starbucks downtown Seattle has had its windows smashed in. I mean, that's a huge cost for businesses, and it's not just Starbucks. Your national big corporations that have insurance that we're seeing this happen to.
Yeah, well, speaking for Mill Creek and the South Snohomish area, where I live, we've seen a small uptick in petty crime. I am concerned that as the unemployment benefit trails off, that we may see an uptick in crime there as folks that that need money for habits they shouldn't have are going to start looking for that money. But we've not seen anything, as the experience of our two electeds here, we haven't seen anything major there. I have, as a small business owner, I have clients in Seattle, and I have been to Seattle. It is not a safe place. One of my clients is in 4th and Pine. It's one of the buildings that's boarded up, and it is quite literally like a ghost town down there. And what I'm seeing from the businesses that I'm working with is many of them are now virtualizing. They're looking at their commercial real estate cost. This particular client I've been working with is going to be moving out of Seattle. This was really the last straw for them. And so they're virtualizing their environment. They're letting their employees move anywhere in the U.S., not just Washington State, but those jobs are now leaving the U.S., and I suspect they'll move their headquarters to a more tax advantage state where they're able to pay less B&O tax, which, as you know, is on gross profit. And now with Boeing today making the announcement, and then the governor's office indicating that they're willing to roll back even more of those tax advantages for Boeing, we're going to see a lot, particularly in the area that I'm in, where I'm paying field. We'll see a lot of folks, unfortunately, lose their jobs, and then the ancillary small businesses that support Boeing with equipment manufacturing. And then the thing that's really affected Seattle, we'll start seeing, is things like coffee stores and sub shops and sandwich places and little restaurants and bars that are individually owned by small business owners. They're finished. They're done. There's nothing there anymore because they relied on those office workers being there. So I think you're going to see a significant change in Seattle once this thing's over, hopefully. We get through this quickly, but I don't know if it's going to take years to get this thing back. There will be people that take advantage of the bankrupt bankruptcies, the foreclosures, they'll buy that property up, I'm sure, and I'm sure they're already starting to do that. But every small business that I'm talking to is doing reduction in floor space in the commercial real estate. If you're in commercial real estate right now, it's got to be horrible. I mean, you must be losing your shirt on this. So you're going to see that, unfortunately. But the good news is, as we've already mentioned, that a lot of the high tech, we're a very high tech state. A lot of the technologies, I mean, I don't know, everyone out there has done so many Zoom meetings. You've met people in their PJs nearly every day, I'm sure. But, you know, it's a changing culture, and we'll work through it. We're resilient. But I do have concern for our downtown cores, Tacoma, Seattle, and we're seeing a little in Everett as well.
Yeah. Well, and you brought up Boeing, and this is obviously recent news for the state that Boeing's going to be moving the entire 787 plant out. You're down in the Mill Creek, which is just right outside of Everett. You're in the midst of it. But I think even, you know, Skagit County, you've got aerospace industry that's in Skagit County. What do you see as, this isn't really an impact from COVID, but it's coming at that same time where you've got impacts of COVID and now this type of deal. What do you see there?
Right. You know, a couple years ago, Boeing was still our largest employer for Skagit County because a lot of people commute down south to Everett and so forth to work. And, you know, that's one thing that's been so great about our community here is we have all these different industries to help support Boeing. But when you have a big line like that leave, that's going to have a big drawback. And, you know, we're going to have to figure out other things for those people to do. And hopefully we have different technology, different industries come in. In Skagit, we've got quite a few smaller boat builders. They're still doing things there. And so, you know, are there some of that technology to be able to go to that type of industry? And so we just have to look at that, see what we can do.
Scott, are you seeing any impact? We don't have a whole lot of Boeing up in the north end of the county.
No, but we'll probably see some. Saffron now is out, so undoubtedly there are people in Linden that work there. But I think in the small business environment, I think a lot of these small businesses this spring really got hurt by the way the economy was shut down. And I'm not a big fan of spending federal money, but the CARES money came to all of us in the cities. And Linden, we started off with about $425,000 in CARES money. And what we've done, we've partnered with the county and did a Whatcom Restart program, which I think has been pretty effective. The city of Linden put in $100,000, and then the county prorated their money and gave us another $160,000. So we had $260,000 that we took in all of the applicants from the city of Linden, and I had a team look at them and allocate the money out as this small group saw fit. And what we did in Linden is we had, I think, about 35 companies apply, and we gave up to $15,000, and it trickled down to about $3,000 to all of these companies. So everybody got a little bit of something. And because it works so well, and there's been a new round of CARES money, we're going to probably do another $100,000 with another $100,000 match from the county again to more businesses in Linden as we open this up. And now the fiscal conservative side of me says, you know, maybe we don't need it. We just won't spend it. But we have a date of November 30 to spend the money and have it allocated and known that the state has December 31. So if I turn it back into the state, I just have a sneaking hunch they'll spend it anyway. So I think I'll try to keep it local this time, even though it might go against what I would normally want to do. So that's my thought on small businesses. We're trying to help out as many of them as we can, give them a little bit of boost. A lot of these businesses, hair salons, barbers, food services, they were really hurt through this.
Yeah. So you know, we talked Saffron here in Bellingham locally, Boeing. We just lost Alcoa, just left the county. We've got a lot of people just in small businesses that have gone on unemployment. That's going to have a huge impact. I mean, the Employment Security Department at Washington State. So we have all these businesses, you know, there's estimates 30,000 from Boeing may be impacted. We had 700 out at Alcoa. I think there was another 250 that were still left here in Bellingham. Mark, what do you see? And we had the Nigerian prince, who obviously is unemployed now. I mean, that's a huge impact to Employment Security Department. How are we able to maintain that and get people their benefits? Because my understanding is it hasn't been working so well.
Yeah, it's pretty much a hot mess. The Unemployment Security Department, for those of you who are unfamiliar how it works, They hold a what's called the Employment Trust Fund. This year it started at around $5 billion, that's with a B, dollars. And it's based on the anticipated employment rate for the year. The ESD was promoting, or excuse me, had calculated the rate this year was going to be around 4.8 to 5% unemployment for 2020. And obviously that's not the case now. Once we went into lockdown, once the governor's office locked us down, they were spending approximately $1 billion a week back in March. So if you do the math, it runs out very quickly. Now, the federal government with the CARES Act money came in, the $600, and they were paying about 2/3 of the claims from that fund. So we were only depleting it at 1/3 of that rate, 300, 400 million per week out of the state portion of this, but it went down very quickly. And then, as you said, the Nigerian prince decided to go on a spending spree. He managed to scam, and the group of scammers, around $650 million before ESD spotted it. 300 was eventually clawed back through stop payments. The federal government came in and stopped that. And estimates are it could be as high as $1 billion, but we still really haven't seen how this is going to play out. So we've lost 300 million of our taxpayer dollars. And this could have easily been presented. In fact, you and I, Vincent, both voted on $44 million worth of funding to improve ESD systems to prevent this type of thing. That upgrade was completed earlier this year, and obviously it didn't work. So you only needed...
It works if you don't bypass the systems that, are set up.
Yeah, and having Microsoft and Amazon in this state, you'd think would be able to build secure systems, but apparently ESD cannot.
Again, we did, and it works if you don't bypass the system.
Right. So you only need the first name, last name, Social Security to file an unemployment claim. And the irony of this, just last week was reported that even ESD employees that were processing claims had their own unemployment stolen from them. So they were processing their own unemployment claims. They didn't figure this out initially. So they've hired a bunch of adjudicators. There's a lot of politics involved at this point, trying to get through the backlog. We saw delays of up to 4 or 5 months on some of these payments. When they reintroduced additional restrictions on photo ID and those types of things, lots of people got locked out. Legitimate people got locked out and couldn't get to their unemployment. And now we've got a backlog of the $400 with the $100 state match as well. So they need massive reforms. I want to see private insurance, unemployment insurance, where you can pay into this and draw when you need it, and maybe even get a benefit at retirement. There's something the Policy Center's been talking about for years, and it would certainly have prevented a lot of the problems that we're seeing. So there's a big mess. The big story, though, really for our small business is next year. The unemployment division has to replenish that money, and they're talking about tripling the unemployment tax rates on our small business, at least for 12 months, possibly 24 months, and then a doubling after that. I hope that's not the case. That will literally be a death knell to some of our businesses next spring. But they do have to replenish the fund. So we've got a $5 billion hole we've got to plug at some point.
Yeah. Have you seen any impact, Commissioner Wiesen, at the county level or Mayor Courthouse at the city level from ESD? You did mention, those unemployment claims that were being paid out, especially with the extra $600. You felt kind of bolstered some of the tax receipts that the city was receiving. Are there any other impacts that you're seeing from either the abuse of the system or just having to access the system so greatly right now?
We definitely had individuals calling, want to know how they can get, they've been trying to get online and not be able to get their unemployment benefits. And so we had, talking to our local representatives and how to get them on the system. So there definitely were a lot of frustrated people out there who were waiting, 5, 6, 7 weeks to get their first check and so forth. And we got those calls, so we need to make sure that the system works. But as mentioned before, it as a whole, it has to get paid back up. And then you put on top of that our minimum wage is going up too. And so you've got a lot of things going to affect those small businesses that have to pay all those things. And it's going to be difficult.
Yeah, and from Lyndon's perspective, not a whole lot more to add to that story. I think they've covered it quite well. So.
Yeah. So transportation is another big deal that both cities, the county, and businesses all need to utilize, right? When we looking at, right now during COVID, essentially transportation infrastructure has almost been shut down because everybody's been locked in their home. They've been working from home. Commuting is way down. Our, here in Whatcom County and Skagit County, our oil refineries are seeing a huge impact of lack of travel, whether it's on just the regular roads or, we send a lot of fuel that goes directly down to SeaTac for all the air flights that come out of there. What are you seeing to your budgets as far as transportation impacts at the city level or the county level?
From the city level, well, we still have a lot of projects that we're doing, and we took advantage of some of the slower traffic to do a few maintenance items that might have been more difficult to do at other times. So those projects are still happening. We have, in my mind, maintenance is a big deal, and so I'm always looking for ways to maintain our streets and our infrastructure so that it doesn't get to the point where we have to totally replace it. So we're pretty good at doing that in the city of Linden, and I think the county and the other cities are also reasonably good at doing maintenance on their infrastructure. It's so easy to forget about all of that stuff that's in the ground and our streets, but they do wear out over time, and we got to take care of them. And we instituted a transportation improvement district a few years ago, and that money helps us do all the maintenance that's required in the city of Linden, and some new projects now and then.
And downtown Linden's looking great.
It is.
From a county's perspective, we have a property tax percentage goes to our road fund, and so we're making sure we keep that fund. We can only spend it on certain things, and that our county ferry is part of the road fund also. But we have about 800 miles of roads in our county, and doing our regular chip seal to make sure we maintain it, because it's a huge asset that's out there in the community that we own, and it's our job to make sure we don't let it deteriorate. And so we have to make sure we do all we can. The other issue, we got culverts replacements and so forth because of the state culvert things. The next thing they figure they're going to go after is the county, because we've got a lot of county roads that have culverts in them, and so we've got probably 50 or 60 that we think are critical to get improved, but we don't have the money to do it. So we're going to be going down to Olympia to see if they got any extra money for these culvert replacements.
They don't.
I know they don't. But it's
Mark?
Yeah, they don't. In fact, Joint Transportation Committee is on a listening tour right now. They're proposing an additional 8 or 10 different taxes for people to weigh in on, including things like the road usage charge, increases in gas taxes, property tax increases. There seems to be no effort from the state to really understand the transportation need and then how to fund it. We're seeing reductions in toll revenue, significant toll revenue in the south end, because nobody's using the toll roads anymore. They're all at 4 or 5, they're all at 75 cents instead of $10 per day, which they were before this. Transit revenue's down significantly, and I honestly don't think that's going to come back within the next 3 to 5 years, because people are just not going to want to get on a train or a bus in close proximity with other people, having gone through our 6-foot distancing thing. In my own city, we have approximately 280 buses that come through per day, with a ridership prior to COVID of 1.5 riders per bus. Those buses are $800,000 each, and we're subsidizing each rider to the tune of around $35 per ride. That is an incredible waste of money. And so the state's really going to need to go back and look at the balance of our transportation budget. The money, they're low right now, but the money's there in normal times to do this, and they can rebalance this. They're facing $7 billion, according to Roger Millar, the Secretary of Transportation, $7 billion backlog in, as you were saying, for maintenance for the whole state, and that grows by $1 billion per year, and that's in the toilet right now because they're not seeing the gas tax revenue to pay for those roads. So that's why there's an effort, I think, for them to want to increase these taxes, but it's going just at the wrong time because everyone else isn't quite able to pay that. The state needs to make some economies as well, and there will need to be some cutbacks. Transit is massively overfunded right now. I know the transit guys would disagree, but when you're spending, as an example, in Mill Creek, they quoted me $5.5 million for a 300-yard sidewalk, and with a light, so that was nice. But when they're overspending like that, and ecology represents such a large part of these budgets, we need some significant reforms, and that's what's going to need to happen.
Right. So we're definitely seeing transit use is way down, and Whatcom County has transit, and Skagit County has transit. What are we seeing as far as, yes, ridership is down. How are those going to be able to stay afloat? How are they going to be able to maintain themselves through this? And you're right. I think a lot of people aren't going to want to be in those tight. Do they have to re-envision what transit looks like at the community level that Whatcom County and Skagit County are?
I'm on the Skagit County Transit Board, and our fare recovery, what people pay, is only like 7-8%. So you got these huge expensive buses, they're not as many people on them, but when you look at there's only so much money coming in for the people actually riding them, that model just can't maintain itself going forward. So, one of the issues we have is we don't have enough routes, the 15-minute or 20-minute or 30-minute time to make people want to use it. And so I don't see how we can keep going, but we're gonna go till the money goes out.
So I'm on the WTA board as well. So, and we have fare recovery. Our goal is 15%. We're closer to 10, and it's less than that now, of course. I've encouraged the board to look, challenge staff to get creative. Let's look at transportation in a different way. I don't know what a different way looks like. I know there's, in my mind, the Uber Lyft type models are out there. I mean, is there a way that you can make that a public something that works in smaller communities like Skagit and Whatcom and make it work effectively or cost effectively? There's got to be something, and we have sufficient budget at WTA to try a few things. And I've been a big advocate of let's try something rather than doing the same old thing and hoping it works again. Let's try something different and see if it works. So that's my goal, is to try something different.
Yeah, in fact, some of the technologies I'm working on a project right now that explores those issues specifically for point-to-point and lower demand, where it's a Uber-style transit model instead of using these large buses, and then keeping the large buses for the high-volume transit routes. You're also going to see a lot of new technologies. Some of us already got them if we bought a car in the last few years. Adaptive cruise control, automatic braking, lane keep. These reduce accidents, which reduce the congestion problems, and actually can increase the capacity of our roads by about 20% because you're able to move a little closer. So I think compare that with the reduction in, because the working's going to change, you're going to be a lot more remote. Pair that with the reduction in people actually commuting. I think our roads are going to be a lot less congested, and the demand for transit is going to change, like you were saying. I think you're going to see a lot more of this point-to-point private partnership. As one economist said, it's like pickup sticks. It's not like the old days where you used to go point-to-point. It's everyone goes to all different places. And we need to re-envisage that, and I hope we can get some leaders in at the transit level to be able to do that. The community transit, not on your board, obviously, but at the community transit level and Puget Sound Regional Council.
So we're just about out of time. I think probably one of the last questions is, especially for Mark, your policy, your Washington Policy Center, your policy think tank. What legislation are you all looking forward to or advocating for, or are you concerned about that's going to be coming up at the legislative level if and when they ever have a emergency session or a regular session in January? Provided that happens.
Yeah, the thing I think we're most concerned about is an income tax, because that not only will tax our residents, it makes our state very uncompetitive compared to other states. And if we're going to get out of this and get out of this quickly, we need to be as competitive as we possibly can. And so the rumors I'm hearing about going for an income tax or a capital gains tax is what some folks are calling it, that will absolutely put a damper on our economy. I think regulation, reducing the amount of regulation on our small business will help them get out of this as fast as we can. So those are the types of things, and you've already heard from Leave this evening on school choice and reopening our schools. Let's get this economy open. Let's get back to work. It's a dangerous world. We've got to get out there and make some money.
I agree with all those. One thing, local government unfunded mandates, we don't need more unfunded mandates. We ought to make sure the rules are in place, make sense. There's some rules that don't make sense, just cost a lot of time and effort to make them happen. So I think all those things are going to be there. And anything we do to increase the cost of living or for businesses in the community, it's going to be harder for us to get going again. So we have to stop that.
And I'll say, I've heard rumors of so many new taxes that are being proposed in Olympia, and I'm not in favor of any of them personally. And I guess what really is bothersome to me is that the government has shut down the small businesses and curtailed a lot of these things, and now are going to go back to those same people and say, pay us more in taxes so we can save our government. it's a bit odd that as government we sit in the room while the private sector is suffering. And that I've said that in numerous meetings over the past few months. It's bothersome to me that we as the public sector are doing fine, relatively, and the private sector's hurting.
Well, gentlemen, I really appreciate the time tonight. It's been a great conversation, and thank you for making the effort to join us and talk about this. And for those of you at home listening, thank you for watching on TV or streaming, or thank you for listening on KGMI or our other partner stations. We really appreciate that. If you like what you've seen, make sure you go to commonthreadsnorthwest.org, commonthreadsnw.org, and make sure you sponsor this, because we can't do this without your support. We'd love to have more support. And for Charlie Crabtree at the Fourth Corner, thank you for doing that. Thank you, and have a good evening.